You will only see this here. Putin's Hazel Grove has been destroyed in Russia, the Kapustin Yar training ground has been smashed to pieces, and the Ukrainian armed forces are turning up the heat. Web 2.0 and the Ukrainian army's offensive are coming soon. Exclusive details from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi. And also, Moscow should get ready for a loud and tough response from Ukraine for the blackouts. Fiery, hot, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch it right now. Greetings, Vladimir Timoshenko here with you. And let's get started right away with the most important topic. This is a real blow to Putin's Hazel Grove. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked Kapustin Yar, the site from which the enemy launches its so-called unmatched wonder weapons. And this is far from the first Ukrainian attack on this training ground, and it definitely won't be the last. My colleagues will share the details.
Putin's Hazel Grove under drone attack. Kapustin Yar is an ordinary settlement where people still live. It is here, at the military training ground, that Russia launches ballistic and cruise missiles designed to hit targets hundreds of kilometers away. And all of this is literally right next to where people live.
This is a specialized facility where various diverse categories of advanced weaponry are rigorously tested. And in this specific case, we are talking about the fact that there are specifically designed launchers or complex test stands there that would facilitate the experimental deployment and launch of a heavy intercontinental ballistic missile. I will always refer to the Oreshnik as a scaled-down intercontinental ballistic missile because we're not talking about any kind of medium-range ballistic missile here.
Including from that very location, on January 9th, Russia launched the Oreshnik towards the Lviv region. But soon after, strikes also hit the very testing ground from which the bunker dwellers' deadly weapons are launched.
Kapustin Yar was attacked by drones. The main testing ground from which the Oreshnik is launched came under attack. Russia was unable to protect this strategic facility.
And this isn't even the first attack on the testing ground. Drones struck it last summer as well.
There is already evidence confirming that strikes on Kapustin Yar have been carried out and that they were intended to destroy launchers that could be used to strike Ukrainian territory. Therefore, in principle, there are quite a few unremarkable things there that can be destroyed, thereby reducing Russia's potential to use this type of weaponry. Another very important aspect of the strikes on Kapustin Yar is the possibility of hitting test samples or a warehouse of partially finished products. But
what's interesting is that missiles intended for Ukraine are increasingly landing in Russia, and not always gently. This even applies to Putin's very own Hazel Grove, with which he so fervently tries to intimidate the world.
Hazel Grove. On February 6th, Russia reportedly launched a second missile of the same type that was aimed at Kyiv. Sirens sounded in the city, but no strikes followed. The missile didn't travel far and exploded on Russian territory. Well,
it's not just the Hazel Grove. Another missile, which is bunker-based and threatens the whole world, is the Sarmat. But the thing is, it hasn't even been launched yet. Well, actually, it was launched twice, but both times it crashed in Russia as well. So, what's the secret behind such successes of the Russian Federation? Here is
the direct and unfortunate consequence of those crashes: catastrophic explosions occurring during critical launches and failed launches. This is fundamentally because Russia lost the ability to access high-quality, sophisticated technical capabilities. It lost the essential technical base that is currently located in Ukraine. Of course, they do have engineers, they are working, trying to create something.
what is supposed to be a weapon against Ukraine sometimes turns into a threat to the Russians themselves. And Ukrainian drone strikes on key Russian military infrastructure only amplify this effect.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. Fierce battles continue. On the Pokrovsk front, since the beginning of the day, the enemy has attacked 39 times in the areas of the settlements of Nikonorivka, Rodinske, Chary, Lyman, Kotlina, Udakne, and towards Filia and Novopavlivka. Today alone, according to preliminary data, 106 occupiers have been neutralized in this direction, 64 of them irreversibly. Putin has no intention of ending the war in Ukraine, claims Alexander Syrskyi in his latest interview with the publication Left Bank. Moreover, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine announces a new counteroffensive by our army. They say that someone in the Kremlin immediately started feeling unwell. The main messages and theses of General Syrskyi are next in our report. Let's watch.
While the civilized world hopes for negotiations, the armed forces of Ukraine harbor no illusions and are preparing for a new phase of the war. Ukraine intends not only to hold the line, but also to regain the initiative on the battlefield.
We observe and witness the enemy's actions, but we don't see any. We observe the enemy's actions closely, and we see absolutely no visible indications or evidence that they are actively making preparations for any kind of diplomatic peace negotiations, initiatives, or strategic actions on the battlefield. On the contrary, we see an increase in the intensity of hostilities and the buildup of the enemy's offensive groups, as well as a rise in the production volumes of strike weapons, missiles, and drones.
The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi, stated in an interview with LBUA that it is impossible to win this war by defense alone. That is why the General Staff is already laying out the strategy for a new offensive operation. According to Syrskyi, Russia's strategic goal remains unchanged, the occupation of all of Ukraine. Only the timelines, available resources, and the amount of weaponry at the Kremlin's disposal at each stage of the war change. And under these circumstances, passive defense only plays into the enemy's hands.
Is most certainly going to be expected to
conduct offensive operations. We will strive and struggle relentlessly to maintain our operational initiative, because this inevitably compels and necessitates the enemy to commit and withdraw significant manpower, weapons and ammunition, in order to effectively counteract and suppress our dynamic offensive operations and strategic maneuvers.
The logic of the General Staff is simple. Offensive actions do not necessarily mean a large-scale advance, but they deprive the enemy of freedom of maneuver, force them to redeploy reserves, and weaken them in other sectors of the front. This is exactly how Ukraine plans to wear down the Russian army by imposing its own tempo of war.
Ukraine's ultimate and decisive victory means that Ukraine has successfully thwarted and completely dismantled the strategic plans of Moscow. Those aggressive Russian plans that envisioned the total elimination and erasure of sovereign Ukrainian statehood and the full-scale military occupation of every inch of its entire territory. The clear and evident inability of the Russian Federation to achieve such a decisive victory, which was in fact explicitly proclaimed by Vladimir Putin himself and is actively endorsed by a very substantial portion of Russian society today, that in my personal view, is precisely what fundamentally defines what truly constitutes a strategic victory for Ukraine. In
2026, the ORF does not change, nor does the approach. Russia still relies not on efficiency, but on sheer numbers. According to Syrskyi, the mobilization potential of the aggressor country exceeds 20 million people, of whom 4.5 million are already trained reserves. This year, Moscow plans to call up more than 409,000 people, while simultaneously forming new divisions and replenishing losses, which have already exceeded 850,000 over the past 2 years of war.
is actually significantly lower than
There are 11 divisions for this calendar year, and of course the continuation of carrying out plans and tasks that were not completed last year.
However, even with this approach, the aggressor faces serious limitations. According to the Ukrainian command, despite large-scale mobilization, the number of enemy assault groups at the front remains almost unchanged, all because of the colossal losses which deplete resources faster than they can be replenished. This is exactly what derailed Moscow's plans to form fully fledged reserve armies and forced them to throw fresh meat into patching up already existing sections of the front.
this constitutes a significant part of the overall strategic planning.
Reserve. You remember that he planned to form 14 divisions. He managed to form no more than half, and even that only partially. And this resource was used to make up for losses. But
The Kremlin's main bet is not just on numbers. Russia is sharply ramping up the production of strike drones and plans to reach the use of up to 1,000 drones per day. This means a change in the very logic of the war, even greater depth of strikes, constant pressure on the rear, and new challenges for Ukrainian air defense and the front as a whole. At the same time, Syrskyi emphasizes that 2025 has not become a year of defeats for Ukraine. Russia has not managed to achieve any of its strategic plans. Neither a breakthrough deep into Ukraine, nor the encirclement of key cities, nor a collapse of the defense.
Absolutely none of the specific items mentioned.
The enemy's plans could be fulfilled. Do you remember how many loud statements there were that they would finish this special operation before summer? Or, for example, before the new year? There were a lot of such statements, just in certain directions. I remember 6 or 7. Offensives were planned. They had very ambitious plans to seize our state, but none of those plans came to fruition.
But stretching out before us now is a vast and uncharted territory that holds many mysterious challenges and hidden wonders.
It's an even more difficult stage. The war is increasingly turning into a competition of economies and technologies, where drones, artificial intelligence, deep strike capabilities, and the state's ability to scale up weapons production faster than the enemy play a decisive role. That is why the Commander-in-Chief emphasizes no one negotiates with the weak. Conditions for peace are created only by strength.
Long-range projectile weaponry in an adequately large quantity. Both ballistic missiles and cruise missiles.
This means producing enough missile weapons. This applies to both ballistic and cruise missiles. And the use of the latest types of weapons, such as laser weapons, and moving to a new level of equipping the armed forces will allow us to reduce the direct involvement of people in combat operations and increase the participation of machines. First and foremost, this refers to drone systems. And of course, the further development of artificial intelligence.
Advanced machines, primarily autonomous drone systems, and initially the further development of artificial intelligence.
Essentially, Ukraine is betting on the war of the future, where the decisive factor is not the size of armies, but technology, the economy, and the ability to adapt more quickly. According to Syrskyi, it is precisely in this area that Ukraine has real grounds to count on turning the tide of the war. And
Now we move to the Konstantynivka direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. There were 15 combat clashes today in the Konstantynivka direction. The aggressor tried to storm the positions of Ukrainian units near the settlements of Konstantynivka, Oleksandra-Shultino, Shcherbinivka, Ivanopole, Klebanbik, and towards Bereztok, Stepanivka, and Sofiivka. Frost as a weapon. The Russians are planning to attack substations at Ukrainian nuclear power plants in order to force Ukraine to capitulate. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. But with his energy terror, Putin is also making life harder for his own subjects, since any strike on Ukraine's energy system leads to reciprocal strikes on Russian energy facilities. So who will freeze whom out? You'll find out now. Watch this detailed news report.
Putin is ready to do anything to force Ukraine to capitulate.
I think no one would argue with that.
While Ukraine is enduring the harshest winter since the start of the full-scale war, Russia has intensified missile and drone strikes on energy facilities. It is
Russian missiles, Russian Shaheds, and Russia's desire to destroy Ukraine, these are clear proof that Russia is not interested in any agreements.
The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine reports that the Kremlin is considering scenarios of strikes on substations that ensure the operation of Ukrainian nuclear power plants. In this way, the terrorists want to force Kiev to accept unacceptable terms for ending the war.
We have done everything possible to put an end to this situation, which is called a war of attrition. Unfortunately for them, it is called something a little different. And today they are already moving into a mode of nuclear terrorism. This is already one of the last such red lines on our side that they might cross. We
are sharing the relevant data with our partners, warning them about the potentially catastrophic consequences. It is time for the world, including the IAEA and the leading world powers that value nuclear safety, to speak out and issue clear warnings to Moscow, forcing it to abandon such reckless plans. And
this comes after, through the mediation of the IAEA, the Russians spoke about a ceasefire in the area of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in order to carry out repairs on the last remaining backup power line.
The IAEA is a large, closed club based on shared interests. This exclusive group of nations encompasses those countries with the most substantial capacities for nuclear power generation worldwide. One of the largest and most significant countries that provides sponsorship to the IAEA is the Russian Federation and its state corporation, Rosatom. With the extensive specialized fleet operated by Rosatom, they are, of course, the most prominent and influential primary donor to the IAEA.
The IAEA mission visited and assessed 10 substations after receiving reports of explosions nearby.
Teams at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant were informed that on January 11th and 15th, drones were spotted flying within 5 kilometers of the sites. A large number of explosions were heard at the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, including some near the facility itself. The team at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant reported numerous air raid alerts, and a military flying object was also spotted approximately 10 kilometers from the facility.
According to the main intelligence directorate, these are targeted attacks on elements of the power system that connect the nuclear power plant units to the country's unified power grid.
By destroying or disabling these substations, Moscow aims to disconnect the nuclear power plant units from Ukraine's unified power system, leaving Ukrainians completely without electricity and heat. As of the middle of the month of January 2026, Russia had carried out extensive and detailed reconnaissance missions targeting 10 important and highly critical energy infrastructure facilities located within 9 different regions of Ukraine.
As for the substations, or the open switchgear of nuclear power plants, it's like a two-way road. First and foremost, a nuclear power plant is designed to supply electricity to the grid, providing most regions of Ukraine with a stable power supply schedule. Green energy or thermal generation is added depending on whether it's morning, evening, or daytime, but this is the foundation of our energy system. And these power plants currently provide us with an average of 62 to 68% of electricity generation.
In the event of the destruction or disabling of a substation, as intelligence reports claim, Russia is counting on isolating nuclear power plants from the energy system, which could lead to large-scale power and heating outages for the civilian population.
There's no need to panic, but you should stock up on warm clothes, make sure you have clean, warm items, and have several spare blankets. And we will get through this difficult period as well, even though it will be very tough for all regional centers and large cities if the enemy attempts to strike open distribution facilities, large substations, or nuclear power infrastructure.
In addition to the fact that the Kremlin dictator continues to terrorize Ukrainians, he is also betting that this will help him increase pressure on Europe and the West.
The enemy is showing that terror, especially now as the wind direction changes and there is an active air mass, could, in some super emergency scenarios, though I don't think this will happen, carry combustion products, radionuclide materials, and so on toward the European Union. This is also a major threat to stability in the European Union. First and foremost, this concerns Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. In
December 2025, the Director General of the IAEA stated that the situation in Ukraine's energy system was at its worst since September 2024. Since the moment when the International Atomic Energy Agency began monitoring substations that are critical for nuclear safety and protection.
The ongoing instability in Ukraine's power grid continues to undermine nuclear safety. Although the backup systems function properly, repeated losses of external power and limited reserves increase the risk and heighten the need for reliable external electricity supply.
He once again called for maximum restraint in the use of force, citing safety concerns.
The strikes on Ukraine's power grid appear to be coordinated for maximum disruption, and their frequency and scale underscore that the overall stability of the grid is deteriorating, not improving. No one wants a nuclear accident, and no one would benefit from it.
On 2 separate occasions already. During the final months of the previous year, specialized IAEA international mission vehicles were targeted and attacked by FPV drones while traveling through various regions within the temporarily occupied territories. Well, it's practically impossible to trust the IAEA, and there were no decisions after that to trust the IAEA or to believe that they have any influence.
Rosatom holds a solid, reliable, and highly honorable place in all the essential life support systems of the Russian state. It remains a cornerstone of national stability and technological progress.
Since the start of the heating season in October 2025, the Russians have carried out more than 250 strikes on Ukraine's energy sector. But Ukraine can deliver a mirror response to Russia. Moreover, there are already results. Our defenders are already striking the enemy's Russian energy and logistics facilities.
Montez Vien, there you go. And look, do you see that smoke?
It's burning seriously over there.
pam, 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 pam.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Now let's analyze the operational situation on the Gulyaypole sector of the front. The enemy army is acting true to form here as well. There have been 16 clashes on the Gulyaypole sector, and in the areas of Gulyaypole, Zelenoye, and towards Varvarovka and Dobropolye, 2 of them are still ongoing. Gulyaypole, Vozdvizhenka, Verkhnaya Tersa, Zaleznichnoye, and Dolinka came under enemy airstrikes. Russia's shadow fleet is gradually sinking. The US authorities have requested warrants to seize dozens of tankers. Following the US, the British will also begin seizing Russian oil tankers. The British government has established a legal framework that can be used to allow British military personnel to board and detain those very tankers belonging to Russia's shadow fleet. All the details are coming up next.
Russia's shadow fleet is gradually sinking. US authorities have requested warrants to seize dozens of tankers. Reuters reports this. According to Washington, these tankers are involved in trading Venezuelan oil. In recent weeks, the US Coast Guard and military have seized 5 vessels in international waters. For example, last week, the US detained 2 tankers that are linked to Russia. Between Iceland and the British Isles, the Mariner tanker, which was sailing under the Russian flag, was detained. According to US officials, the tanker was transporting oil for Venezuela, Russia, and Iran, thereby violating US sanctions. The operation was carried out by the US Coast Guard. They had been pursuing the vessel for several weeks. As media outlets have discovered, the oil tanker Mariner seized by the US belongs to the Russian company Burevest Marin, whose director and sole owner is Ilya Bugay, an entrepreneur from Crimea, which is occupied by Russia. In addition, in the Caribbean Sea, another tanker from Russia's shadow fleet, the Sofia, was detained. Footage of the detention was posted on social media platform X by US Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. The detained vessel, MT Sofia, was operating in international waters and was engaged in illegal activities in the Caribbean Sea. Political analyst Petro Oleszczuk is convinced that everything currently happening regarding US strikes on Russia's shadow fleet should be viewed in the context of the United States' special operation against the Maduro regime in Venezuela.
The Maduro regime was quite closely connected with the Russian regime. President Maduro has officially received advanced air defense systems and sophisticated military weaponry directly from Vladimir Putin. And again, the Russians were extensively and directly involved in the long-term development of Venezuelan oil resources, in the strategic acquisition of the corresponding revenues, as well as in the complex process of exporting Venezuelan oil, despite the persistent and relevant opposition from the United States government.
Subsequently, Trump stated that he planned to control Venezuela's oil resources in order to revive the country's declining oil industry. The position of Russia and Putin himself regarding the detention of tankers is also interesting and telling.
Notably, this did not provoke any strong reaction from Russia. That is, there were some statements from Russian politicians, but overall, Putin himself remains silent. In other words, Putin himself is showing that, in general, he is not ready to engage in confrontation with Trump, even if Trump seizes Russian tankers. So it's clear that in this situation, Russia has for the first time faced a rather serious pushback. Pushback regarding its main scheme of illegally exporting sanctioned oil.
Following the US, Britain is planning to seize oil tankers from Russia's shadow fleet. According to the BBC, the British government has established a legal basis that could be used to allow British forces to board and detain shadow fleet tankers. As the BBC clarifies, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela are accused of operating vessels without a valid national flag in order to circumvent oil sanctions. Last week, British armed forces assisted American troops in seizing the oil tanker Mariner. To date,
Not a single British service member has boarded any of these vessels. But in recent weeks, officials have been considering possible measures.
Ministers believe that the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2018 could be used to authorize the use of military force. According to available information, there are plans to use these powers by the armed forces, which is described within the government as a strengthening of measures against these vessels. The exact date when the UK's first military actions will begin is unknown.
The UK government believes that the new legal mechanism it has identified can be applied to any vessels subject to sanctions and lacking legitimate registration.
Currently, Russia exports 50% of its crude oil using tankers from the Shadow Fleet. We are talking about a fleet whose number of vessels, according to various estimates, reaches up to 1,400 tankers.
Currently, the UK has already imposed sanctions on more than 500 suspected shadow vessels that are believed to be helping Russia finance its full-scale war in Ukraine.
If, for example, the UK follows through on its promises to intercept Russian tankers from the Shadow Fleet, it would be a very serious blow to Russia and a very important argument.
Now, following the US and the UK, all EU countries also need to join the fight against Russia's Shadow Fleet.
And strikes against the Russian Shadow Fleet in Venezuela are quite significant. This is an example for Europeans of how and why it is possible and necessary to intercept the relevant sanctioned tankers.
Every liter, every barrel of oil exported from Russia fills the Russian military treasury, and the profits from Russian oil exports are used to manufacture missiles and drones that are used to strike kindergartens and hospitals in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. And I do care about this. That is precisely why I believe that the European Union, and above all Germany, must consistently fight against the Russian Shadow Fleet.
And one more piece of news. US Senator Lindsey Graham writes that Donald Trump has given the green light to bring the bill on sanctions against Russia to a vote. So to speak, he has given hope that the voting process could begin very soon, first in the Senate, then in Congress.
After this productive meeting today with President Trump on a number of issues, he approved the bipartisan sanctions bill against Russia, which I have been working on together with Senator Blumenthal and many others. This is timely as Ukraine is making concessions for the sake of peace, while Putin only talks and continues to kill innocent people. This bill will allow President Trump to punish those countries that buy cheap Russian oil, which fuels Putin's war machine. The bill will give President Trump a powerful lever of influence over countries like China, India, and Brazil to force them to stop buying cheap Russian oil that finances Putin's bloody slaughter against Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukrainian international sanctions have already stopped 20% of Russia's Shadow Fleet. And this is just the beginning.
Now let's move to the Alexandrovsk front line. The enemy army's bloody rampage continues here as well. On the Alexandrovsk front, Ukrainian defenders repelled 4 attacks by the invaders toward Ivanivka, Novoye Zaporozhye, and Radosnoye. The settlement of Kivili was also hit by an airstrike, a military alliance without the US but with Ukraine. After Trump's Greenland ultimatums to NATO partners, Europeans began preparing for the possibility of the United States leaving the North Atlantic Alliance and for a new format of defending the continent against military threats. Politico reports on plans to create a new alliance with Ukraine's participation. How viable is this idea? What will this new alliance look like, and what benefits will membership bring to Kyiv? You'll find out everything now.
The political crisis surrounding the island of Greenland has made the EU consider how to move forward without America's support. Donald Trump made it clear to the whole world that he is determined to take the island at any cost.
If we don't go in there, Russia and China will. Denmark won't be able to do anything about it. But we can do everything.
The US president's threat to impose tariffs on any country that tries to stop him from seizing Greenland was the last straw for the EU's patience. This was reported by the American publication Politico.
But for many European governments, including America's oldest and most loyal allies, Trump's threat to impose punitive tariffs on anyone who tries to stop him from seizing Greenland was the last straw. They believe that now a breakup is inevitable. In frequent conversations, concerned European officials called Trump's hasty decision to annex sovereign Danish territory madness and delirium. Politico.
It seems that Europe is ready to create a new alliance instead of NATO, without the US but with Ukraine. Ukraine could play a crucial role in this defense alliance due to the size of its territory, its geographical position, its defense industry, and the fact that it is already at war and has invaluable experience.
Ukraine will be key to Europe's defense primarily because of its technological base, particularly its well-established production of top-class drones and the presence of the largest army in Europe. Juraj Maichin, military analyst.
For example, the United Kingdom, France, the Scandinavian and Baltic countries, Poland, Germany and Italy spent most of Trump's second term working as part of an effective group without America, the so-called Coalition of the Willing. And it could become the beginning of a defense alliance between Ukraine and Europe.
The Coalition of the Willing initially focused on issues concerning Ukraine. It created very close ties between some key people in the capitals. They strengthened trust and the ability to cooperate. They know each other by name. It's easy for them to get in touch and send a message. If you factor in the military power of Ukraine, as well as the strength of France, Germany, Poland and the United Kingdom, the potential armed force of the Coalition of the Willing would be enormous. It will include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Politico.
Europe currently buys all of Ukraine's weapons from the United States, and Ukraine in turn has the largest combat-ready army in Europe. Therefore, a new military alliance without the United States is entirely possible, given that the threat from Russia will not disappear even after a possible peace agreement.
Ukraine has friends who understand the nature of Russian aggression as a common problem. With them, we can try to create defensive alliances. Tactically, we can try to form regional unions, for example, with the Baltic countries, Poland, other Central European states, and the United Kingdom. This will be a temporary and not very stable means of pursuing our strategic interests. But it is possible and necessary to look for options for other defense alliances. Anatoly Kruglashev, political scientist.
The question of the EU's need for defense without US support has been discussed for a long time. In recent days, many initiatives and bold headlines have come out of Brussels, and the coalition of those willing to support Ukraine could be the beginning of the creation of a new defensive alliance. Officially, the EU has decided to ensure its self-defense by 2030. But in the context of war, this decision could be made much earlier.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, there will be new unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.